So today going to be, this 3 class reading this sutra, and then because next Saturday we are ending the raining retreat, then we have 8-9 days very crazy in the monastery because monks will have their holiday. So all sorts of musics you will hear in a very late night. I don't know who knows those music, but you will hear. So I'm planning to go a little bit away from the monastery, and it's difficult to have the good internet connection. And then coming back, then there is there is a teaching going to happen in Tashalumbu Monastery, and I'm going to go for not all the teachings, but some teachings. So I'm just looking at those things. But sometime in October, I'm thinking about to do another 3 or 4 Sunday classes. Maybe continue the reading the sutras, some other parts, or to have some like a mind training, lojong text, or I haven't decided yet, but sometime in October and mid-October and early November we may have 4 classes. I've just looked at my diary. There is a possibility, so that's what. Just let you know. Okay. So now we are going to start this session. All right. Setting the right positive motivation to join this gathering. As we know from our own experiences, and also have heard from those great teachers and read from those great texts, the importance of setting the right intention, how we going to spend the day, and how we're going to engage in particular activities during the day. And so that is something I see a very, very important in the sense, very, very helpful. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, keeps saying, in the morning when I woke up, he says, either I say this verse, or he said, I think about the Buddha, or always, right at the beginning, it seems, before he starts his daily, teachings or the meditation, anything, he set his, the right motivation, how he's going to spend the day. And I think, as I have said before, the reason why he keeps saying that, how he's, what he thinks in the early morning, he, indirectly, he is suggesting us to do that. For example, the last 2 or 3, the days he gave teachings. Although the teaching, the text itself is very, what you call very philosophical text. Chandakirti's entering into the middle way, Madhyamika Avatara. But most of his time, he spent to talk about the cultivation of good heart, bodhicitta, the altruistic awakened mind. Along that, the understanding of emptiness. So, he keep I counted several times. I counted during those teachings. He said 6 or 7 times in the morning. He says in the morning, I think about bodhicitta, bring the bodhicitta in my mind. So that is something which we should habituate ourselves. And when we come like this kind of together, and at the beginning, saying the refuge and bodhicitta lines, every time when we come together, saying those 4 lines, and at the beginning, before saying those 4 lines 3 times, try to say a few words and the importance of setting the right positive motivation. And that can be, as you know, that kind of right positive motivation can be set according to our own mental strength, not something which is ourselves is not ready. We don't need to push ourselves to set that kind of motivation, because that is what teachers have said, that is what those great texts have said, not in that way. Something that we ourselves, feel from our heart. This is what, the positive, constructive, that I can, my current level, I can, live my life with this kind of mental state, like a minimum, deliberately, very intentionally not harming others. That I can do, that I can, and set that kind of motivation. And if we can go a little bit above that, I can help, not only, very intentionally, deliberately refrain harming for others, but not only that, I can do something for others, no matter how small that might be, and set that kind of motivation. Then, of course, gradually build, develop, more, like the bodhicitta and all sorts of things. So the other day, I was reading a small group in Taiwan. I was reading the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. We reached chapter 4, which is quite often in Tibetan it says Pagyu, and in English sometimes translated conscientiousness, the chapter. And there, Shantideva, right at the beginning of the chapter, right after the first verse of that chapter, 4 or 5 verses, Shantideva keeps saying, it is important to, what promise that you are making, what kind of, the action that you are making. You must, first you must analyze whether you are in that level, in that state or not. Make sure, and that is I find very, very important. Why he is saying that? Because if we analyze, if we investigate the motivation that we are setting in the morning, during the day, if we are able to live our lives during the day according to that morning motivation, at least 70-80% after when we check, then we can set that. But if we can't keep that morning motivation, even the 5%, then keep setting that motivation. We may learn, bad habit. Keep promising, keep setting high motivation, but in reality, during the day, we are even, unable to keep 1, 2, 3% of that morning motivation. And that's what Shantideva is saying, to check your the task that you are taking. When when I read those verses and read some commentaries, and the main reason I think is, to be conscientiousness, to be very, mindful what is happening during the day, and when we face the challenges. If we have right at the beginning, if we really know we are going to face challenges, we are going to have to, then there is we are in a better position to face those challenges. If we haven't really checked or investigate what kind of motivation that we are setting in the morning, whether we are able to keep or not during the day, just promising like that, though it might be something good, but unable to keep that, our day's activities according to the morning motivation, then seems, when we face the challenge, we immediately give in, not to sort of, face the challenge. So that is something important. Anyway, so set the right motivation, like that. And many of us, have taken the Buddha Dharma as our spiritual path. That means taking the Buddha or the Buddha as our teacher, mentor, and the teachings, Dharma, as a means and methods to be applied in our daily lives, to be experienced, to be actualized within ourselves, and the Sangha as our spiritual friends, supporters. So, all the time, morning, during the day, reminding ourselves, these are my refuge. Though we may use some of the means and methods to solve our some of the day-to-day difficulties, but deep down in our heart, in our mind, these three jewels are the main refuge need to overcome the challenges and the difficulties. That is something useful. Of course, we need to use some worldly tools, means to solve some of the worldly challenges and difficulties. But the root of those difficulties, those challenges, are those three poisons: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And these three poisons are very much, deep-rooted, ingrained our psyche, within our psyche. So to really deal with them, then the three jewels are without taking refuge in three jewels, it is very difficult to overcome, to uproot these three poisons, which are the root of our challenges. So like that, thinking that, therefore I will, during the day, whatever challenges, difficulties that I face, I may use, worldly solutions to solve the temporary challenges, but my main means and methods to really overcome the predicament that I face is the three jewels. Thinking that, then it goes very well, very nicely, according to the refuge, taking refuge. Same as bodhicitta. Currently, for example, myself don't have a genuine bodhicitta, but trying to have that mind, at least the yearning, longing to have that mind. And so like that, sincere, genuine, and then, what you call it, saying, I will live today my life, my activities of the body, speech, and mind, as close as possible, according to this altruistic awakening, which I'm very much, yearn, which I very much, want to experience like that. And that is something useful. So setting motivation, training ourselves, habituating ourselves, morning to set the right motivation, how we're going to spend our day. And now here is this gathering, physically here, verbally saying some mantras, some recitations, mentally listening, contemplating, and then all these activities, all these karmas, karmas from 3 doors, body, speech, and mind, be constructive karma, constructive actions or not, very heavily dependent on to have the right motivation or not. So therefore, to set the right motivation, and now we will say the refuge and bodhicitta lines. Sanje chödang soje cho chanjo panpo dani dagi chenso son Rola penje sanje Sanje chödang soji chonam chanjo pato dani chaso che dagi jenso jive chonam Rola penje sanje chödang Sanje chödang soji chonam chanjo pato dani chaso che dagi jenso jive chonam Rola penje sanje with the mind taking refuge in 3 jewels and the altruistic awakened mind as our main intention. How we're going to spend our life, our day, and how we're going to participate in this gathering. Now we will say a few times together the Cheresic mantra. When we say the mantra verbally or silently, say the mantra, mentally, hold a very strong compassion towards all living beings, That includes ourselves, our loved ones, our family members, colleagues, friends, and the community members and countries and entire, living beings. Strongly imagine that your deep sense of compassion to is rich towards all living beings, and particularly those human beings, sentient beings who are going through a very difficult, time, either physically not well, mentally difficult, or environmentally challenging, all sorts of difficulties, very, very obvious difficulties, taking place all over the world, So, and particularly those gross, very obvious difficulties. Some of them lost their family members. Some of them, have a huge, like recently in Pakistan, millions of people really lost almost everything because of heavy rain and flooding, or some other places, or man-made disaster. Not only humans, are suffering, but also other many animals are also suffering. So think about gross challenges, suffering, to all the way down to all unenlightened beings, one way or another, experience that difficulties, challenges, mainly the three poisons, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, are very much, embedded in our psyche, in our mental continuum, and because of that, so therefore, all sentient beings, are subject to experience that share our compassion, particularly those that's living beings who are going through very obvious, sufferings. So hold that kind of strong compassion while saying the mantra. Ma on. So before I read the sutra that we started last Sunday, it is very, very helpful when we think about ourselves, our own the challenges, difficulties, whatever that might be. It may relate it to the physical, it may relate it to the the mental, it may relate it to financial, it may relate it to family members, or the place where we live, and so on and so forth. Of course, those challenges are real in the sense we experience the old age, sickness, losing our loved ones, losing our own, and all sorts of things, financial challenges, all sorts of challenges. And these are real. We cannot deny saying they don't exist. It is important to acknowledge there are challenges that we face, that though we may use means and methods to overcome completely or to reduce, to minimize, and those are the whatever means and methods are there. It is good to use. It is good to use, not to what in English there is a word or term, not stubborn. Stubborn is like that, not to use those things and continue to hold your headache or whatever. And it is good to, if there are solutions to reduce the challenges, it is good to use. But same time, it is important to build mental strength. To build mental strength, not to be overwhelmed by those challenges that we face. Not to be overwhelmed by those challenges. And building mental strength is something that we humans can do, unlike animals. Our pets, those cats and dogs, they may use some solutions, but mentally we are much capable. We are much capable to build mental strength, not to be overwhelmed by those challenges that we face. And particularly when we, like many of us, follow the teachings of the Buddha. And some of those basic teachings that we read last week and week before, or before, many of you, I'm sure you have received teachings, read the text, read the sutras of the Buddha, like the Four Noble Truths, Four Noble Truths. And so those are the something that, us, one of our previous lives, or many of our previous lives, had created what you call the causes in this life. And many of you, Buddha Dharma is not your forefathers' spiritual path, but somehow, you choose, you choose to take the Buddha Dharma as your spiritual path. Not only right here and now, not only this lifetime, but also, next life, life after, until liberation, enlightenment is experienced. Experience. Not only for the Mahayana practitioners, not only oneself, but all living beings. So that kind of. So, some of our previous life had done, very good work. So, in this life, we have the, we have this great opportunity. Many of us have met many great teachers, many great teachers. Don't need to think about very much in the past, like the Buddha, like the 17 Pandits, Indian masters, or some of those in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, some of those great Tibetan masters around 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th. But in our lifetime, last century, 20th century, and this 21st century, we are lucky. There are many great teachers, and we have received directly or indirectly teachings, and there are many good texts, commentaries. Some of those written by those great masters in 7th century, 4th century, or the Tibetan master, 8th, 9th. Some of those are very difficult to understand. But now the modern scholars, practitioners, those great teachers, make them too easy to understand and to put into more simple, language, not using some of those very, difficult terms and so forth. So in that sense, we are very, very, if I use the English term, lucky. But it is not just luck. It is, some of our previous lives had done very, very good job. Sometimes when I say we are very lucky, we receive teachings, and that it sometimes indicates, it is just accidentally happen, or but it is not like that. These the very fortunate or these great opportunities that we are, regardless of all those challenges that we face, but within that there are many positive things there within ourselves, individually and also collectively. And also that is important to be aware of, not to ignore, not to dismiss, that how fortunate, fortunate that we are, and not just fortunate, but currently, we are able to practice the Dharma. We are able to practice the Dharma. Even just, the one day, if we are able to practice Dharma, that day is, we should feel, we should cherish that day. And that is something important. Important in the sense to build mental strength. That is one of the way to build mental strength, not to be overwhelmed by some of those challenges that we face. If we look at from the other side of the challenges that we face, there are many positive things. As I just said earlier, the last 2-3 days, I was staying here, living here in South India, and His Holiness was in North India and giving these teachings, amazing teaching. And through the modern technology, able to participate, almost like in front of His Holiness Dalai Lama. and that is something very, very, fortunate, very, very fortunate to have that sort of thing. As you know, there are current His Holiness Dalai Lama is 14th as recognized as the Dalai Lama. Out of 14, we can count, in our finger, only a few Dalai Lama had that kind of capacity. The first one, fifth one, 8th, 7th or 8th, and 13th, and the current one. Others, there were so many of them passed away very young and so forth. And particularly current His Holiness Dalai Lama, is something just amazing. Not only, we are not talking about from the, the Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist point of view, being, Avalokiteshvara. I'm not talking at that level, from that level. Of course, we can talk and discuss from that level as a real Avalokiteshvara, but in a more, common sense or, that level. Like, since his childhood up to now age 86, Dharma is the main sort of, activities that he had carried on. And with that, then learning, many important modern things, and then, to really dedicate his activities to enhance happiness in humanity, fulfillment in humanity. So we are very lucky to have the opportunity to listen at our time, not something in the past, but in our time. And those are something, I found is very, very helpful, to build sense of, this life is not perfect. This life is not not perfect, but still have these great, met these great teachers, have, including His Dalai Lama. So those are the way to build the mental strength. And ourselves, as I just mentioned briefly, ourselves have the mental faculty to think, to analyze. Emotionally, we have the ability to express, to share our sympathy, our acknowledge others' pain and difficulties. We have the mental faculties, emotion to support others. And these are something very, very positive things. And so in certain extent, many of our previous lives have, give us this gift, this life, and all the positive things, what's happening in this life. We also should, if we genuinely and dearly love ourselves, then we should, not only this life, also we should, have a next life after, like what we are having these great teachers, and training ourselves gradually, towards liberation, enlightenment. So that is something, from time to time, to remind ourselves how fortunate that we are, how our previous lives have done a good job, and I want to do the same to my next life and the life after. I think I may have shared with you when I was young boy here in the monastery, in our Sera Mey monastery. Not many that time, not many numbers of monks, only 107 who came directly from Tibet, and then initially 10 years in Assam. in East India. Then late 1960, early 70 came here to reestablish. So when they came here, there were only 107 monks in Sera Mey. And there's one monk which I have a very keen memory, and also, was very, very kind, very, very thoughtful monk. And, he always wear very, what you call the clothes, his clothes. I mean, those days, our situation was very, very poor compared to today's. Today's very luxury. Everything is really luxury. As I say, it is a luxury life. It is not monk's life. How we live, what we have, and all those things. It is not monastic life. But those days, so this monk, among those elderly, he was one of the monks who were very, poor, not very, those days, very poor things. Anyway, and, I keep teasing him, saying, why you are wearing very, very poor clothes, and all the time same, upper garment and same the lower garment. Why you don't have a second one or third one? A young boy and not have any life experience and all sorts of things. And his answer was all the time same answer, not very, too much blah, blah, blah. His answer is same. He will say, oh, young boy, the, karmic result can be, reduced. Karmic results are not, there all the time. More you use, more the karmic result will get less exhausting. So he will say, that's what he will say. Occasionally he may say, I'm saving my positive karmic result for the next life. So those days, it doesn't make that much sense to me. Now I can see what he's talking about. What he's talking about. So like that. So it is really important to acknowledge how fortunate that we are. All these amazing things, particularly from the spiritual path that we have chosen, that the facilities that we have, supports that we have, externally, internally, ourselves are able to do, unless if we don't want to, or otherwise we are able to do physically, mentally, and also. And that is, in that way, then, thinking to the past life and preparing for the future lives, and while we are enjoying this life, what we have. And that is something important. Because, so many, as we talked about last week, so many, sad things are happening. Although there are many good things are happening, but the good things are not mentioned by the media or all sorts of things. Only those sad things, challenges. So when we keep hearing, seeing all those sad things, sometimes we may, on top of that, our own, the challenges, samsaric challenges, then we may feel very much overwhelmed by those. But we need to build mental inner strength, and this is one way to build our inner strength. Oh yeah. So last Saturday, we start to read this sutra. The title is the Peacock Sanctuary, the 143 number. And here, Buddha, in this short sutra, Buddha explained, to the monks, a monk or somebody is best among the devas and humans, that person, one who has reached the ultimate conclusion on ultimate security from bondage, live the ultimate spiritual life, and gain the ultimate consummation. And what three? So those three he listed. What are those three that we really make somebody to experience those, the ultimate security, ultimate conclusion, and security from bondage, and the ultimate spiritual life? And he listed three. And out of those three, last week, we look at the first one. That is the aggregate of virtues behavior of one beyond training. So that is living, having ethical life, having ethical virtues, the virtuous behavior. And there, last time I listed, when we talk about ethics, practicing ethics, then, there are those great, classical Buddhist texts talk about three kinds of ethics that we practice, particularly when we look at from the Mahayana, Bodhisattva, those great masters, Indian great masters' texts. And the first one is ethics from refraining from non-virtues, refraining from non-virtues. So our body, speech, and mind to refrain from those non-virtues, the activities. And that is first one. In Tibetan, Nyeche Domba. Nyeche is non-virtues. In Tibetan, Nyeche, non-virtues. Domba, literally it means restrain. And that is something, we, the beginner, really something need to pay attention, which I briefly mentioned last Sunday. Refrain from non-virtues out of compassion, not out of fear. Sometimes when we restrain or refrain from doing such and such out of fear, not out of fear, out of compassion to others as well as compassion to ourselves. Then, restraining from non-virtues, there won't be any kind of sense of, the unease, when we do that. Very, very helpful. If we do that, if we try to restrain our actions of body, speech, and mind out of fear, then gradually may develop sense of resentment towards that practice, because we do that out of fear, which is not very helpful. Though sometimes when teachings are presented, they say that, if you don't avoid or if you don't restrain from this non-virtue, not that non-virtues, you will experience some kind of unpleasant consequences in the future. That is one way of presenting that. But the actual practice of ethics is, for example, the first one, the restraining, is not out of fear, it is out of compassion. So that is the presenting out of saying, or if you don't restrain your body, speech, and mind, such as, for example, such as 10 non-virtues, you may be born in lower realm, such as such. This is a very, for the very, 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 presenting that way is for the very beginner, very, very beginner to, in a very shallow way to present. It is much better to present and think out of compassion. Compassion to ourselves and compassion to others. And that is true, not killing, restraining from killing, taking others' life. If our restraining is only from taking others' life, it's only, if I take others' life, I may, have similar consequences in the future. That is very narrow, not very, though it may happen, in the karmic consequences, we can present that way, but it is mainly to others' life is precious as my life, as precious as mine. Think in that way. Then if we restrain, very, very healthy way to practicing, this ethic, very, very helpful. So that is the first one. And the second one is Gyawa Chudim. So second one is, to really to live our life with the virtues. Taking what you call literal translation is, ethics, ethical practice, ethical living, ethical life through collecting the virtues. So, for example, out of self-centered mind, if we start to engage some activities, and to really to restrain from that activities, restrain from that activity is to bring a virtuous mind, like the mind cherishing others. It is not just only ourselves restraining from that action which is led by the self-centered mind, but there is a virtuous mind is cultivated, is developed, and that is very helpful. So to have some kind of mental strength, to have discipline, ethics, to bring the virtue wholesome in our mental state, in our actions, the physical, verbal actions. Without that kind of discipline, without that kind of ethical, that kind of discipline, then difficult to bring the virtues, to enhance virtues in our lives. Because as we may give up as soon as we try to live with the virtues, mental states or activity. And when we face challenge, if we immediately give up, then never going to enhance or cultivate further. So what we need is really not to give up, not to give in immediately. We need that kind of discipline, that kind of mental strength. And third one is very much from the Bodhisattva practitioner's point of view, ethics, ethics to serve living beings. Ethics to serve living beings. So to serve living beings, all living beings, we need ethics. We need discipline. Not to give in immediately when the self-centered mind occurs, to really have mental strength. So these are really here. That's what the gather of virtues, behavior of one beyond training. So as I mentioned the other Sunday, one beyond training, in the sense once we train our mind, these different stages of different levels of ethical way of living, restraining, collecting the virtues, serving living beings. When we live that kind of life, once, week, months, years, decades, then they will, will have one beyond training. Beyond training in the sense, after we train again and again, eventually, they become very much part of our way of living. We don't, we don't need to put that much effort that we need right now. Currently, we have to pay lots of attention whether self-centered mind is occurring or not. We need to pay lots of attention to do small virtuous things. We need to pay lots of attention to restrain some of those basic non-virtuous activities. But when we do that again and again, so this term, one beyond training, quite often Buddha or Buddhas or Arhat are also called no more learning. That means they have done all the work and not anymore need to learn because they already learned it. And this term is, this term comes very often in those classical texts, which is in here too. So then the second one is out of those three, the aggregate of concentration of one beyond training. The aggregates of concentration. So here, the other day, the last Wednesday, this Wednesday, I was leading a short, class to the monks, Sera Mey monks, on Wednesday. So I was reading, the Geshe Great Lamrim from June, and not every day, but every Wednesday, an hour. And then my last reading this year, reading was this Wednesday. And now I focus on meditation. I didn't read page by page, like traditionally that we do, like oral transmission. The first year, when I become abbot, I said, I'm not going to read page by page. I will read those important points where we really need, our training. So I focus on mainly the meditation. Because, in the monastery, we have lots of, focus on study. Sometimes that part is a little bit neglected, particularly young boys. Now, the elderly, they may do, but the young boys, while they're in the debating study program. And so I was reading Tsongkhapa's Great Lamrim in the meditation section, in the early part and the later part where he explains the shamatha. And, that he was saying very clearly, when we say shamatha or when we say concentration or samadhi, he was saying main, ingredient is the mindfulness, Jampa, mindfulness, mindfulness. The mindfulness is the main ingredient. Either we say shamatha, calm abiding, or when we say concentration, different stages of concentration, or samadhi, different stage of samadhi, you are saying main ingredient is mindfulness. Mindfulness. Now here, because I was preparing to read with the monks, because some monks are, their studies are quite advanced stage. So, I'm not reading the text to very new young boys. I'm also reading to a group that, entire Sera Mey students are there in the debating podium. So I have to prepare a little bit, otherwise they will say, this abbot is completely crazy what he is reading. He doesn't know what he's saying. So, so therefore, what Geshe is saying, in the mindfulness, there is also, though in the early training, mindfulness and conscientiousness, there's another terminology is used, introspection, introspection or conscientiousness. In the earlier training, these two are explained separately in the different stages, But eventually, these two are, within the mindfulness itself. When our mindfulness become very, when it reach its full strength as a mindfulness, then in there is also, introspection or conscientiousness. There's no separate mental factors or mental faculty as a conscientiousness or, introspection. It is one within the mindfulness. If the mindfulness is in its full mental strength, then there is also, element of, ability to see whether mind is, diverted to other stage or not. And I was talking to the monks, because in the training, in the early training, the function of the mindfulness is, not to lose the object of the meditation. And the function of the either conscientiousness or introspection, whatever term that we use, is function of that mental faculty is whether the mindfulness has lost its meditation object or not. So these two are introduced as a separate, different, but Geshe is clearly saying that is the case in the early stage, but when the mindfulness is really reached its full strength, then in that single mental, mindfulness, it has full ability to hold the object, also have the ability to understand whether the strength of the mind is losing or not. And that is something here, which is when we talk about aggregates of concentration, because some, traditionally or classically, there's a mindfulness, there's a introspection, there's a shamatha, there is a concentration, and the first level of concentration, second level, then there are so many mentioned. But mainly, it is the mindfulness. That's what Tsongkhapa is saying. The main ingredient is mindfulness. So therefore, what I'm saying here is, we sort of pay attention. The basic, or the starting point to build mindfulness is simply paying attention to our, activities of the body, speech, and mind that we from morning wake up, open our eyes, to evening go to bed. There are routine activities, there are special events that we engage in. pay attention to those activities. Many of those activities, like for example, I'm using my hand gestures, constantly, and it is part of the habits built up. But I should pay attention, and that is here some of those, like for example, this now he passed away, that great Vietnamese master, Thich Nhat Hanh. I think those trainings are very, very important training for us at the beginning. Very, very important training to pay attention to our activities, daily activities. That is the learning to build the mindfulness. So a very, very something when we talk about concentration, we shouldn't think at this stage. Though we do, when I say we, I'm thinking about myself, thinking something amazing, and concentration. That is the sign of not going to happen. Not going to happen. What is important is to think here, right here and now, what kind of that I can do to pay attention to my body, actions of my body, speech, and mind. And that is the part of, again, the first one, the first training, which is the ethics. If we pay close attention to actions of our body, speech, and mind, then we are in a better position to, if there are certain wrong things are happening, we can refrain. So a very, very what you call the basic training, basic Buddhist training, which when I read this this collection of sutra, there aren't that much I had come across, although it's quite a big book. I haven't come across very something up there. All the times are down to earth, down to ground, something that we should do, we can do right here and now. And that is something, so the aggregate of concentration, that is what we should pay attention, be aware of what is happening with our actions of our body, actions of speech, actions of our mental states, particularly this very rich emotion, very capable to think so many things. We need to pay attention to our mental thinking. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so the second one. The third one is the aggregate of wisdom of one beyond training. Aggregate of wisdom. So the wisdom, Sera in Tibetan, turn down, turn mayimba chube, rikpa. Turn down, turn mayimba. Turn is the literal translation, what are the right. Turn mayimba, what are the not right, not correct. Juba means analyze. Rikpa is the mind or consciousness. Mind which really analyze which are the right, which are the not right or wrong. That is, and when we talk about wisdom, the basic levels of wisdom is that kind of mental faculty. Mental faculty which really, goes to analyze to investigate, to reflect on what are the right and what are the wrong in our activities of the body, activities of the speech, and the activities of the mind. And as I briefly touch on Shantideva's, the you call the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the chapter 4, the conscientiousness chapter. Because I've been preparing, and it is very helpful mentally to myself. Leading these classes, that gives me opportunity to read, then forget all the monastic problems, meeting problems, administration problems, to really forget this and read and enjoy and try to understand. So Saturday, when I was reading the guide to, and though I have read in the Shantideva's text many times to myself and to share with others, and in fact, I have memorized entire text, but when yesterday morning, Saturday, when I was preparing to talk to the group, and those the verses, the first few verses in that chapter, Shantideva was very, very clear to say, before taking any action, you must analyze. And that includes mental action. Mental action is later, one of the two verses is talking about promising to all living beings, saying, I will invite you, all living beings, as my guest, and I will offer you the highest happiness, which is enlightenment, but in reality, not doing anything. And that is what he was saying. If you are going to make that kind of action, before you act physically, verbally, mentally, you must analyze. You must analyze. I'm not saying don't think I will invite all, but it is quite serious, that sort of thing. So, that ability to analyze is here within us. We have this kind of faculty. In fact, some of the basic mental states that almost all, particularly all human beings share, according to the Buddhist Abhidhamma text, is one of those mental factors is Sera. Sera, that is wisdom. Though wisdom here, we are talking about slightly different levels of wisdom, but basic, what you call the wisdom is there within us. And many of you have heard, my joke, particularly my joke or tease, I don't know, or my own experiences. When you are buying mortgage and you analyze a lot, which one is good, which one is cheaper, which one is more reliable, which mortgage company is better, and do lots of analysis. That is the clear sign. We have the faculty to analyze, but our faculty is not used that much to those right. I'm not saying right. Something that we should be using, like our actions of the body, speech, and mind, like self-cherishing. How destructive that self-centered mind is. How constructive, how useful that mind, looking after others' well-being. We don't we don't analyze that much. Many of us, myself, including myself, we just, take for granted, and we say, oh yeah, those great teachers have said, and that is how it is. We don't do that much analysis. And it is important ourselves to have a real confidence. Yes, self-centered mind is something troublemaker, which is always used this term very often, troublemaker. And it is true, it is true. So the more analysis that we do, and result of the analysis, we will get the conviction. When we gain conviction, then that mind will not change that much. Otherwise, many of our current Dharma understanding is very much, as you have heard, in a level of assumption. Just assuming self-centered mind is troublemaker. But we ourselves not that much convinced that is troublemaker. Because our teachers have said, because Buddha said, because those great texts have said, and then we assume that is how it is. And a mind really carrying others' well-being, we assume is source of happiness, but that is assumption. We don't have the conviction. And sign of we don't have conviction is we don't do that much. We don't challenge the self-centered mind. That is the sign of we don't have the conviction. The self-centered mind is troublemaker, and we don't work that much to enhance mind carrying others. And that is the sign of we are not fully convinced ourselves that is the source of happiness. Shantideva clearly stated in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Mangdo Sheta Chishiku, Chibarangi Tunjeta, Tuanshingi Tunjeva, Tinitini Kavaratu. So he says, don't need to say that much. The difference between the people who have, who live with self-centered mind, and the people who live with the mind and carrying others. If you look at the sentient beings and those enlightened beings, that is very clear. The difference between those beings, and we will immediately tell, the advantage and disadvantage of these two mental states. And that is really clear. So, the wisdom analysis is a very important factor to gain conviction, to gain certainty, that kind of, definite. When we gain certainty, when we gain, the conviction, then we will act with that mind. And then, for example, if we really gain conviction, certainty, the self-centered mind is troublemaker to myself and to others. And then when self-centered minds start to arise, we will do something. And that is which is human reaction, human nature. For example, if we keep, continue to keep turn on our, what you call water tap, we know this is going to cause bill, and we immediately, turn off. And that is, because that we have the ability. Because the water company will bring the bill next month. That is certain. And that is our experience. So we turn out also environment issue and other things. So we humans have the ability, if we gain certainty, then we'll change. Currently, so certainty is only through the wisdom, through the analysis. So this third one, and this is what Buddha said, after finishing that list of those three, Buddha says this: possessing these three qualities, a bhikkhu is best among devas and humans, and gain the ultimate, consummation. So that is, many of you have heard, that these three are quite often called three trainings. Labasum in Tibetan, three trainings, or with Tibetan Buddhist tradition, term is used, three higher trainings, to understand the difference from the non-Buddhist ancient Indian spiritual traditions also have those three trainings, and Buddhist training is called three higher trainings. Trainings of ethics, trainings of concentration, and trainings of wisdom. And those are the basic. With these three trainings, then we can talk about, do you remember in the Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path? We can talk. We can expand from the three training, Noble Eightfold Path. Out of the Noble Eightfold Path, first two are the training of wisdom. The next three are the training of ethics, training of concentration, and the last three are training of ethics. They are slightly different ordered list, but otherwise that's how it is. Then if we look at from little bit from the Mahayana's teachings point of view, then we can look at 5 parts, part of seeing, part of accumulation, preparation. These are elaborated, but basic training that we should have in our life is those three: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. But these three are, very often in the training, they are interwoven, they are interconnected, not completely separate, not like that. As you know, the Dharma wheel, which is the symbol of Buddha Dharma, which has three, which represents these three trainings: ethics, wisdom, and the concentration. The center, the round hub, is ethics, and those 8 spokes are the wisdom, and the outer rim is concentration. So, when we talk about practicing Buddha Dharma, we can have all these three from the, in our modern education level. From the kindergarten level, we can train ourselves. Don't need to train immediately at the university level. Start to train at the kindergarten level. Make ourselves very familiar, very master ourselves from the kindergarten level, then build higher and more advanced. And this is what here the Buddha in this beautiful, as we read last Sunday, he taught this teaching, this beautiful, that his time, it might be very beautiful, the peacock sanctuary near Rajgir, where, so, and it is sometimes when I find in my own experience, I find sometimes very, very helpful to read these simple, the teaching that Buddha himself taught, and not too much philosophical complication. Something right here and now that we can simply do, ethics that we can do, levels of concentration that we can do, levels of wisdom that we can do. So that is how this sutra is. Okay, so we will end our today's gathering with the reciting 21 Pali prayers, dedication. Omoji tse ma pama doma la cha tse chanze doma nyuma ba jene geji lo dang cha jimbo jiden sungwe chugi she kesara che wa le chanze dongge dawa kawa jene tsikwe she kama dongda choba rabdo chewe ramba chanze sengwe chone ke peme chane nambara ke jeba zundu gado she soba samden ju chanze teshin shebe zo taye nambara jawa che malu paru jimba to jawe segi shindo ten chanze do da rahon de dan choda kan jigden dombo shabdi leba meba guban chanze jajin mela cha nongla nazo wanju che jombo rona chesan nejun soji dune chanze teje chadang paru chogo rabdo ego yenjan shabdi meba choba shindo chanze dure jimba che deke pao nambara chong chuji shane chonye de rao tamje malu se chanze kunjo sumzen cha seme toka nambara de malu choji kolo je rangje weje sonam che chanze rabdo kawa je ojin weje chengwa de shiba rabshe dodar dedang jingden wando chanze sashi kyongwe cho tamje guba nima chonye yewa yige hongba tamje nambara cho chanze dawe dombo yamba tamje shindo para rebe chone weba me dabara shindo rabu se chanze gebe tama me barwe chengwe wene eja yungu mukune daye pumne nambara cho chanze sashi ngola cha teki neke shabye do chonye chenze yige rinpa dumbo namne chanze dema gema she nyangen deshin chuni sowa omda yanda diva chenpo jomba chanze kune korawaka jaye lune nambara ke ike chube ngane ko riva hungle chomani chanze ture shamne da honge nambe sabeni ra menda ratan jikten sumna yawa chanze laye soye na rida dajen chana tara nije peji dena malu pani se chanze laye sonam ke ada meam chi de kune ko cha kawa chi zeda melo ne ba se Chanze Nima Tawa, Chinya Pola, Rapse, Hara Niju Tudara, Shindo Tabe Renese, Chanze Tini Sumnam, Shive Toda, Date, Yedara Nujin So, Jamba Ture Rapchon, Zaranga de Tebate, Chanze Wane Niju Sa. Dewa di jiu Sanama Yishe Sozo Sanama Yishe Lechon Tamba Kunyi Toba Chanjo Semjo Rinpo Maje Panama Chejo Jeba Nyamba Mepa Kone Kondo Kari Rave Kore Shimpama Pendan Dewa Mali Jungme Chenre Sewa Tenzin Jankun Shabe Sede Pato Tenjuro. Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you so much, Geshe.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Geshe
thank
Tashi.
you.
Thank you so much.